And thank you, Rick, for inviting me here. Although I'm old enough to be Rick's grandfather. Well, he too has been a mentor to me. I met Rick first because I invited him to a seminar that I produced at Harvard. It was a summer seminar, and it was called, it was about buildings built in their region. And everybody said, you have to invite Rick Joy. So we get up there around the seminar table, and here's Rick Joy, and here's Brian McKay Lyons, and here's, he's from Nova Scotia, and here's David Miller from Washington State. And I get all the students to go around the room and say why they've come. And they say, well, we want to learn more about regional architecture, and we want to get a sense of the place down there in Arizona. So when it came to Rick, Rick said, well, I came here because I'm hoping to steal a few ideas. Right away, I knew I was going to like Rick. Well, my talk tonight is it's about drawing. There's some architecture in here, but I've been a lifetime sketcher. Many of you are too, I know that. And that's really going to be what I want to focus on tonight. But I'm not going to talk about drawing as a way to make a picture or to illustrate a project. I'm going to talk about drawing instead as a way to see. One of my great teachers, although I never met him, and that's not Rick Joy over there on the left, that's actually Le Corbusier. Another one of my great teachers. When I was a student, I studied in England. I spent my vacations going to France trying to see every building he'd ever built. That was a major part of my education. And I made sketches of them. And partly that was because I knew he was a sketcher. He sketched all the time. When he was 18, he sewed a pocket into his trousers so he would always have a sketchbook with him. Here he is at his summer cabin. It's on the Mediterranean. And you can see he's got a pencil and a piece of paper there. And what he's looking at is this view. I found that little sketch that he made of that view. Notice that it's not trying to be a beautiful picture. It's actually fairly crude. It probably took less than 5 minutes. Notice that he's got little notes on it about things that he's looking at. What he's doing when making a sketch like this is trying to understand what he's looking at so that he'll remember it. Here's a closer view of that sketch. So you can see he's labeled it. You see, he says, this is the railroad line, so he's labeled the railroad line there. Here's the low road, and here's the high road. And down here it says, this is my cabin. And that's his view outside the cabin. So little sketches like that mean the world to the person making it, because it allows that person to actually understand what they're looking at and remember it. If I take a photograph of something, I'll probably forget it. But if I make a sketch, I'll never forget it. So here's a sketch I did recently. It took 5 minutes. I was standing when I made this sketch. What do we get from making a sketch? Well, in a sense, this is a set of barns in Kansas. In a sense, we get to sort of recreate the construction of those barns because we have to think about how they relate to each other. We have to get a sense of where the wind is blowing from. We get a sense of what materials were used and why. So it's a way to understand. Secondly, it's a way to remember. I'll remember this little visit to John Mills' farm forever. But thirdly, and maybe just as important as anything else, is that when I make a sketch, I'm in the moment. We live in a world that is riddled with distractions, from social media of all kinds to conversations, to attention spans, to noise. Very frequently, infrequently do we get a chance to focus on something for 5 minutes, totally absorbed in that, which I think is another virtue to sketching and drawing. So to go back to Le Corbusier, you know, the other great thing about a sketch, you remember it, and in a way, it becomes part of your architectural toolbox. In 1910, Le Corbusier was a student going around with his sketchbook, and he made this little sketch of Hadrian's Villa. 42 years later, he was asked to design a replacement for a church that was bombed out on a hill called Ronchamp. And he remembers that sketch that he's made. It's actually of a light well. You see that shape up there, and it comes down to this vaulted space, and that's the view. There's the light well at Ronchamp. And there's the interior of the light well at Ronchamp. So, in addition to being a way to understand what you're looking at, it also can form this wonderful reference. Here's another architect who likes to draw. You may recognize him. This is a little quiz that they gave him in the New York Times. Please draw what you look like. So there's his little sketch. Notice that these are not artistic drawings, right? What's your secret talent? Drawing. Does anybody know who this architect is? David Adjaye. And there's his secret, which is drawing. And then this is the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. And the sketch of it. Which, by the way, is an incredibly moving exhibit. So, I've been a sketcher all my life. One of the things that I like to sketch a lot is a barn. Why do I like sketching a barn? There's probably no better way to understand where you are than a barn. I have this fantasy that if I were blindfolded and put down anywhere in North America, and I opened my eyes and I saw a barn, I'd know where I was. You know, because barns are intimately related to where they are. You can read the topography when you see a barn. You know what grows there. You can tell where the sun comes from, where the bad winds come from, by looking at a barn. The kind of barns I mostly see in North Carolina, where I grew up, and that I worked on also when I was young, were tobacco barns. They're about 24 feet on each dimension. They're a cube. That 24 feet is based on the size of a tobacco leaf. Where I live, we do something called flue curing the tobacco. The tobacco is heated to a high heat over 3 days to cure it. So each of these little barns has got the same geometry, but every one of them has a different place or location. And every one of them is modified by the farmer who understands where the winds blow, where the sun comes from, how the drainage works, to fit that location. So this farmer, for example, has grouped 3 of his curing barns together with these 2 porches because that's the shady place to be used in August when they're priming the tobacco leaves onto the stalks. Here's another barn. It's in Texas. It looks really different. Notice that they don't have to store any hay. That tells you that it's probably a barn for horses, and it tells you that there's sufficient pasture all year long that they don't need to store hay. So as I've traveled around, I've learned to look at barns. Some people call it reading the landscape by looking at a barn. There's a barn, a red barn with a blue hydrangea. It doesn't get much better. So here are 3 little barns in North Carolina. Notice that they're on hillsides. Where I live, a farmer will never put a barn soil is. That's where you plant things. You won't find barns in the valleys. Not in Alabama, not in South Carolina. So they're usually on hills. They're perched on a hill. That means the farmer understands hydrology and where the water flows. Notice that these barns usually have porches or additions. If you look at those porches or additions, you can tell which way is north. And if you look at where the doors are, you can also see where the prevailing breeze comes from. So a little change of subject here. Going back several hundred years. This is a sketch by the artist Rembrandt. It's of his wife, Saskia, whom he loved dearly. I think you can see that from the sketch, his affection for her. This sketch probably took Rembrandt 5 minutes. He did it with a feather dipped in ink, a quill feather, and then he created a little wash with the ink and water and used his brush to fill it in. When I was studying art at university, they always taught us that people like Rembrandt, Caravaggio, and others, they kept sketchbooks to work on ideas for their great paintings. I came to the realization that Rembrandt was using his sketchbook for the same reason that I was. He was trying to capture the moment, as simply as that. So here he is, Saskia is looking out the window, and he captures the moment. Leonardo da Vinci said, drawing is a way to understand the world. The great English art critic, John Berger, said, if you really want to understand something, you'll have to draw it. So, sometimes I draw dinner. This is not an Instagram photograph or a Facebook meal. Those are the ones where I had to leave. This is a dinner I had recently on a river in North Carolina. It's called the Roanoke River. And for dinner, I had rock and a piece of herring. It's a rockfish. It's not a rock, a rockfish. And, some slaw, and very, iced tea, sweet, of course. I recommend a lemon pie. This is a place called the Cypress Grove. It's on the banks of the Roanoke River, and it's open for 2 months every year. That's it. Only for 2 months. Why? Because the herring, which is the most numerous fish in the sea, comes up this river every year in the millions to spawn. And for 200 years, farmers have put nets out and caught the herring. So I just think it's so wonderful, so regional, so much of its place. Every year I get my friends together and we drive down there, usually on the evening in March, and we order a rock and a piece of herring. It's a really nice event. So this is the Cypress Grill. That's what it looks like. See down there is the Roanoke River. It's what we call a black river in North Carolina versus a red river. So it's a shack, right? In fact, it was a fishing shack. And at one point, that owner turned it into this place, and it's now sort of an institution in this little part of North Carolina. So I made this sketch, and I went and I was talking to the owner, who's the cook, and I told her that this is a really wonderful thing. You've got these fish, and we come down from Raleigh, and you just get them out of the river and cook them. And she said, oh no, these fish, they don't come from here. We haven't been able to fish here for 15 years because we fished the darn river out and the Fish and Wildlife Service won't let us fish here anymore. So these fish are from South Carolina. Well, anyway, the point of that story is that I wouldn't have learned all those things had I not made a sketch. 5 years ago, like I said, I've been sketching for a long time. 5 years ago, I came up with this idea that I would take a sketch, and it could be any sketch in my sketchbook, and I I would set myself the assignment of writing 200 words about that sketch, but I couldn't repeat the sketch. You know, I couldn't say in the words what was in the sketch. That was self-explanatory. And so I called these native places, these sketches, and I've done them every 2 weeks since then, every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. I post one of these, and as Matt said recently, I've turned 64 of them into a book. So here's one I did, for example, in 2012, right about the time the worst hurricane to hit New York City in 100 years came through. It's called Hurricane Sandy. My daughter lives in Brooklyn. New York, you know, New Yorkers are, as far as they're concerned, nature is an option. You know, you don't really worry about where the wind blows. We got everything we need here in New York. We're safe. We rule the country. So Hurricane Sandy comes through, floods lower Manhattan, cuts the power out for 2 months in parts of Brooklyn. Devastating. So I wrote this little piece called Building in the Face of Danger, and it was about how people in North Carolina, who were fishermen themselves, had built houses like this for 200 years, and they survived far worse hurricanes than Sandy, because they were built with nature in mind, and they paid attention to where they built. They didn't build right on the water, they built behind the sand dunes. They didn't build out in the open, they built in the shade of these 200-year-old live oak trees. So, you know, we've had 3 hurricanes in the last 3 years, and I can tell you these buildings are still there. So a few years back, I was asked by my brother, who had lost his first house and his first marriage to a hurricane in 1988, to design a new house for him. That's literally true. The hurricane ended his marriage. And so he said, you know, he bought this lot on a creek, and he loved this view. And of course, the view faces west. So there's 2 kinds of sketches here. Most of the sketching I've been talking about is just, you know, trying to sort of make a note or understand what it is you're seeing. So here's the view of the sunset, beautiful sunset. Here's another kind of sketch, which is an idea sketch. You know, we live in a world of computers. I love them. But there's still no quicker way to take an idea and use a pencil in your eye to work it out, or change it, or see it evolve. So here's a 2-minute sketch. And in it, I'm trying to deal with the fact that Joe, my brother, wanted a window 12 feet high that would face that sunset, which in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, where this is located, is murder. You know, to have a hot sun like that coming directly into your big 2-story living room. So in the sketch, you can see that I was kind of fiddling around over here with some kind of louver, just as I saw in an architectural office today, people fiddling around with louvers. Jeez. Yeah. And so this is eventually what I came up with an incredibly talented sculptor named Christian Karkow, who built these folding screens, right? So that when a hurricane does come through, they can fold down and protect Joe's 12-foot high windows. But for most of the year, they can be open and they can enjoy his view. But from June through August, they're kept shut, so the sun, the afternoon sun, doesn't come in. But you can still see through them. Now, you know, Rob Miller knows all about this because he lived and worked in Charleston, South Carolina. People in Charleston have known about shutters for 200 or more years, right? So I felt like this was a modern interpretation. Each one of these weighs 700 pounds. They're counterbalanced with weights over here, and you can move them with your finger. So here's what they look like. And, you know, to many people in Charleston, this is a familiar view. A building Somewhat before that, I was asked to design a house in the Bahamas by my friends who lived in Raleigh, North Carolina, and they wanted a summer house. And they told me they found the perfect island. It was called Scotland Key in the Bahamas. And I said, well, what about hurricanes? And they said, oh, we've done a lot of research. And we find that, you know, for some reason, the hurricanes never come to Scotland Key. So another thing they told me was that you have to collect all your own rainwater there because there's no, you can't drill a well, you just get salt water. And, you know, it's nice if the building is tall so it doesn't flood. So here was the design. And this is a sketch I made when I was at a lecture on the psychology of art. That's some of the notes from, I didn't listen to the lecture, as you can see. I started out well. So what I did was I made this big funnel to catch all the water from the roof. I knew that that would create a Venturi effect for breezes going through. This is south, by the way. I put the living room on top because it has the best views. I put the bedrooms here, and then I put all the cisterns down here. It turned out on this island there are only two ways to build things. One is with concrete block and stucco, and the other is with wood. So I designed these two very clear systems of, you know, wood infill in a sort of a block stucco cube. And this is what it looks like. This, by the way, is the only photograph of me as a scale figure, completely nude. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to die, but you can see there's a shower here, an outdoor shower. So anyway, how's that for a view? I mean, this could almost be a Rick Joy project. So here's the house. You know, most of the plans that I do are very simple and straightforward. Whenever I got to a tough place on designing something in the office, I would turn and look at Matt and say, well, what would a farmer in Kentucky do? Because really, if you think about it, farmers, they have to figure it out themselves, you know. So I think it's interesting that my sketch, here's a sketch of a tobacco barn. By the way, I've never copied a tobacco barn. You know, I don't do the sketches, but I'm trying to get the sense of it. I'm not trying to adopt it as a prototype, right? But I like to think that the kind of clarity and logic of that tobacco barn is captured in the clarity and logic of this. So that's another habit that drawing teaches us, is clarity. Our friend Steve Dumas, who has a magnificent architectural firm in New Orleans, told me when he heard I was going to be down there, he said, Frank, you have to go out and see Oak Alley. Anybody here been to Oak Alley? Well, yes. You know. It's an avenue of oak trees that are 300 years old and a house that's almost 150 years old. Right? So the Oak Alley predates the trees. Steve said, the reason I want you to go out there is not to see the house. It's the shadows that I want you to see. I made this sketch, and you know, back there was the house. It's a nice house. But there's magnificent live oak trees, and there's Spanish moss, and there's shadows, and a dappled white. It's unforgettable. Well, about that time, my wife, who was a landscape architect, volunteered me to be the architect of a project for the J.C. Ralston Arboretum in North Carolina. She was on the board, and she came home one night and she said, well, Frank, I volunteered your services for free, you know, to do this thing. And so I said, okay. And this was just after we'd been to Oak Alley together. And so this is it. This is my last house. It's a pretty big building, actually. It's about half an acre, 20,000 square feet. But I love the way that it just evaporates into this, an arboretum is where they have specimen plants, and a lath house is where they do trials for plants, and it has a very precise sun to shadow ratio, so the plants don't desiccate. Well, I thought about things that I'd sketched. Here's a sketch I made of a screen door. This was a Native Places piece. I called it Back Porch Mondrian. It's a screen porch down in eastern North Carolina. I'm delighted at the Arizona Inn. My room has a screen door. And this is a screen porch. And so I made this little sketch. And it's amazing what one can learn from a detail. For example, notice that the person who made this door was pretty careful. They mortised the style into the upright style. Right? Notice that they made it out of oak. It's not cheap pine or fir. They wanted it to last a long time. You can tell that it's lasted a long time because it's got 4 or 5 paint jobs on it. And down in eastern North Carolina, where people are like for their buildings to get a little shabby, they're not going to paint it until it needs it. So I'm guessing just from looking at this, that door, this screen door, is at least 80 years old. It's been banged all that time. And I can also tell that they had a dog. How do I know that? I'm sorry?
Springs pulled out?
No. They put another grid of hardware mesh here where the dog will try to push through the door. So, I didn't even think of that sketch, but it's sort of in my head about planes and veils, and I love the way this building turned out. It's so quiet, it's like a veil. It's all made of 2x2s, by the way. They had $500,000 to build this thing. It came in at $110,000. Here's that same veil under a different light. I love things like that. It's so simple. You can see that there is some metal in it. That's where it touches the ground. But everything else is suspended. Here are the 2x2s. And these are cantilevered and they're suspended down like a tablecloth. So that they just kiss the ground.
What is the wood?
As pressure treated pine. We took it seriously. We did a lot of research. These are pearland beams. These, because those are the only microlambs that you can pressure treat. And we looked at making this thing out of metal. We looked at making it out of plastic, reinforced fiberglass. And in the end, we decided this was the best thing, thermally, as well as for performance. I want to say one word. Overhangs. Where I live, overhangs are very important. We have a lot of rain, and we have a lot of sun, and people don't like to paint their buildings. And sometimes they like to stand outside with a cup of coffee on a morning when it's drizzling. And an overhang is a friendly thing. So in my sketchbook, you'll find lots of overhangs. This is a restaurant in Cozumel, where they have this particular way of building with thatch. Look at that overhang. Out here, the groupers swimming in the water. Fantastic. This is closer to home. This is in Greensboro, North Carolina. It's the Greensboro Craft Diesel Block Repair Company. It's very specific. Right? And it's made by the person who repairs those diesel blocks. We're thrifty in North Carolina. He's a block blues, we will it back together. So, the person made it. I've learned, if I see a building that somebody's made for themselves, pay attention. Because they know what they're doing, just like those farmers did. So, for example, he's got these 3 big folding doors so that he can back the diesel into here to work on it. Over here's his little office. Those doors all collapse and fold over to right here, so he just, he projects a little beam over here, and he's got to put a post there, so he says, well, why don't I go ahead and just make it a tall post, and I'll put one of these $25 street lights you can get from Kmart there, and it'll light my parking lot. And I want to keep the rain out, so I've got an overhang. And I want to keep the sun out in the summer, so that overhang works for that, but lets the sun come in the winter. There's hardly an architect in North Carolina that can do something this well. So here's one of my projects from recent years. This is the North Carolina AIA headquarters. You may never have heard of us in North Carolina, but we have the only brand new AIA headquarters in the country. Everybody else is in a renovated building. Ours is in a freestanding building, which was built from scratch. It cost $3 million. And here's an early sketch. You can see it's about a roof. It has a big overhanging roof facing south. The roof comes up and wraps over the building and turns down to make a smaller roof here for pedestrians on this busy street. And there's a stone wall that roots it to the ground. This was the competition sketch. Now, we used a computer for this. It was we did it in SketchUp. But I drew the building in by hand. Ashley Osborne applied the color, and our landscape architect, Greg Glean, drew the trees. One of the reasons we won this competition, it must, by the way, a competition. If you're going to have headquarters for architects, how do you choose the architect? So we had to have a competition. There were 60 entries, and this is the one that they chose. The night we won the competition, we were so excited. I thought, wow, we've won this competition. And then I woke up the next morning and I realized that there were going to be 2,400 clients. That's how many architects we had on the AIA. And there was going to be a building committee of 12. 8 of whom had entered the competition and lost. So I went to them, much like Rick told me he organized these lectures. I went to them and I said, I want you to treat me as an architect the way you would like to be treated as an architect. Well, good luck with that one. So, anyway, that was a sketch. There's the real thing. Why is the roof so important? Overhangs. The south-facing overhang shields it from the sun. This one on the north side shields the pedestrians. It's made of metal. We have metal roofs all over North Carolina, for everything from tobacco barns to Baptist churches. So it's got sort of a high and low quality to it. We wanted to use stone from North Carolina to root it to the earth. So we found that if we use stone from 3 different quarries, we've got much better color range. We used all native trees to plant it. We gathered all the rain from the roof. It's lead platinum, of course. But here you can see this is this photograph was taken on June 21st. And you'll notice that the entire southern wall is in shadow because of that big overhang. And this has been used for many a public occasion, and the porch makes this a welcoming area, as porches have done in the South forever. Here's a little sketch I made in South Carolina on Edisto Island. I was just about to leave the vegetable market, and I made this little sketch. And I've been driving down this road for 40 years to go to my sister's cottage, and I've always loved this tunnel of trees. It's so mysterious. So I made this sketch, and what I realized in this sketch is that it's actually made of a tree here and a tree here. It's not a tunnel, right? It's made of two trees on each side. That summer, I was up in Chicago for the AIA convention, and I went out to Oak Park, and I saw this house by Frank Lloyd Wright. You know, we think of Frank Lloyd Wright houses out in the prairie. Well, here he is in Oak Park. And there was this rather big Victorian house over here. Look at how Mr. Wright responded. He brought a little wing of his house out here to shelter the entrance to the house, so that, you know, when you walk up to the house, you weren't overshadowed by this big living thing. Well, about this time, Sethi Saidi asked for me to design a house for her. This is where the house was going to be located. This is one of the busiest streets in town. And this had been rezoned to be 5-story apartment buildings. So when I found all that out, I asked Seppi, "Are you sure you want to build here?" She said, "Yes. Furthermore, I wanted to have a flat roof." No clients ever said that to me. I wanted to have a flat roof. And so I started to think, well, what can I do about the fact that this is going to change drastically in 2 or 3 years' time? So here's some sketches. Here's a plan sketch. This is the north side. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, I'll bring the cars in here. We put all the kind of Hochet stuff in the house here, and then we create a courtyard, and it'll be nice and sort of self-contained. But she didn't like the idea of a courtyard, and so I started thinking about a house organized more like this, as a U shape. And then I started thinking, well, what if I bring the walls and roof up over the house, so it's kind of sheltered like that. So here you can see some study models. And here's that living room roof coming up and over, as you can see. And here's another roof on this side. And so it made it possible for her house to be very open. It's amazingly open, this house, but it's in this very tight little neighborhood. And that's how it turned out. I haven't had it professionally photographed. I just did these with my iPhone. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. Did I mention overhangs? See, every roof has got something, every window has got something that protects it. This is the stupid house. This is one of my Native Places pieces. And I wrote it because, you know, there's a lot of conversation now about smart houses and how with an iPad you can do all kinds of things. Turn the heat up and down, and make the windows go up and down, control every light. And I thought there was something to be said for a stupid house. And this is what I would call a stupid house. It's in Charleston. It's a building type in Charleston, known as a Charleston single. Why is it a single? Because it's one room deep. Because it's one room deep, every room has windows on at least 2 sides, and every room can be cross-ventilated. These houses date from 1800. Today they're worth millions. On the south or the east side, you could build a porch, and that would shade the south sun and allow the sun in the winter, provide a pleasant place to be outside, and would also be the main circulation space. There's no hallways in these houses. And you actually enter through a door onto that porch, which in Charleston they call a piazza. So I thought there was something to be said for a not-so-smart house. About that time, Matt Luck and I were asked to do an addition to the oldest church in Charleston, a church dated from 1680, called Circular Church. They had African Americans in their congregation in 1850, very progressive church. In 2008, when they hoped to finish this, it would be their 5th century in existence. And they said, Frank, we want a totally modern building. We want it to be sustainable, LEED platinum, everything. You know, give it your best. And I thought of the stupid house. But I also thought about the fact that Charleston has the most challenging aesthetic architectural review board. And you're looking at two survivors of that process, Rob and I. And it's called the Board of Architectural Review, the BAR. You know, I thought BAR was where you had a drink, but in Charleston, it strikes fear from the heart of architects. So this is what I designed. You know, it has a piazza. It's a Sunday school. You know, when I told the congregation, this makes a lot of sense because 1/3 of your building doesn't have to be heated and cooled, and you've been using piazzas in Charleston for over 200 years. It wasn't hard to convince them. The piazza on the porch makes a very nice extension to a little Sunday school room. This is a view of it from a historic cemetery. It was built next to an 1850 Sunday school, the first Sunday school in South Carolina, by Robert Mills, who later designed the Washington Monument. And so it was a very historic building. And I kept thinking to myself, you know, they want this modern building, but there's an elephant in the living room here. You know, it's got to pass the architectural review board. Well, we worked with a local architect, Whitney Powers, and Whitney told us things like, well, don't make it any taller than the eaves of the Robert Mills building. Don't let it touch the Robert Mills building, because it means some point in the future your building can be torn down and it won't hurt that building. So in fact, it's an inch away from this building. We put a flat roof on it, and we had a green roof up there, and we used the water to irrigate the churchyard. We used wood because that's very common in Charleston, and stucco for the same reason, and steel because there's a lot of steel on porch railings in Charleston, and we painted all that dark green. So I had this in model form, and I took it down to the Board of Architectural Review, because we've been working on this thing, what, over a year? And now, you know, we were going to take it in front of the Board of Architectural Review. I've been to other boards of architectural review. They're held in a courtroom. The reviewers sit where the judge is. We architects come as supplicants with our little models. So on the way down, by the way, Matt, who's working on the project, he sent me down to present this project. I noticed that Rick sends you down now. That makes sense. So on the way down, I stopped at a rest station at Interstate 95, changed into a linen suit, put on a bow tie, and showed up at the Board of Architectural Review at 7 p.m. They were in the process of creaming another architect, just routing him, and told him that he had to come back for several more reviews before they'd even consider it. So I get up and start presenting my project. And I say, you know, we thought a long time about this. It's right next to a historic Robert Mills building. We will not touch that building so that building is recoverable. We've made a flat roof so it doesn't disturb the roof line of that. We're using local materials that are common to Charleston. And just at that point, the chairman of the board said, stop. Well, I figured it was coming. At this point, I was in trouble. He said, stop it. He said, I want you to know I've been on this Board of Architectural Review for 8 years, and never have I seen a modern building that fits Charleston the way this one does. It's approved. So, you know, sometimes it works. Okay, so I continue to sketch. I continue to think. I was at a Christmas dinner in Provence recently. Christmas dinners in Provence can last for 5 hours. There's a great deal of wine, many courses. It was in a farmhouse. The farmer and his family were doing the cooking. So to clear my head, I walked outside and wandered around a little bit, and I went into his barn, and I saw all these plows. This is just 6 of them. There were 36 plows. Every one of them was different. So I made a little sketch. And like I say, sketching causes us to think. So I thought, why are all those plows so different? Well, it's because each plow was made for a specific crop on a specific hillside for a particular season. Because the same farmers had been farming on this land in the same family for generations. They knew what they were doing, just like a farmer who builds a barn in Texas. This is how we plow in America. One plow does everything. This is the landscape in Provence where those plows belong. It's a classic landscape of Provence. It has vineyards, olive trees, and wheat fields. Bread, wine, and olive oil, the essentials of life in the Mediterranean. And each one of those plows is going to be made for a crop at a particular time of year or in a particular location by the blacksmith who works here in the little village. Yes?
Are you suggesting that they're still using horse-drawn?
No, he keeps them now as kind of a memory of his grandfather. In fact, some of those plows were his grandfather's plows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I came across a cemetery, and it was surrounded by trees, and I noticed that a lot of the plants in the cemetery itself were things like roses, which have to grow in the sun, they don't grow in the shade. And they were struggling, they were toleated, the roses. And so I thought, well, what's going on? I made this little sketch. And then I looked at the engravings on the tombstones, and I found that there was all the family of this man, Lemuel Fox. You can see he died in 1916, he was born in 1838. And so what I realized was that Mr. Fox and his sons, when they were plowing the fields, would gather up stones and make, if you will, their final resting place. And I thought about that and I said, who of us now knows what will be our final resting place the way that Lemuel Fox did? My son lives in London. One night he took me to a pub. It was a Friday night. I made this little sketch. You can see it's a pub across the street. I made the sketch from the pub that we were in the foreground. There's a sketch of the pub across the street. Everybody's outside. Everybody's wearing black. It's London. Everybody's drinking a pint. They're smoking. They're texting. I said, Will, what's going on? It was an evening in May. I said, why is everybody outside? There was nobody inside our pub either. Everybody was outside. He said, the last day of the month in London, that's when everybody gets paid. And what do you do when you get paid? You take your friend out for a pint. You go out for a drink on a Friday evening. And you don't have to worry about driving home because London's got a fantastic transportation system. So here were these pubs. And later on we walked through this part of London, it's called Soho. Every 2 or 3 blocks there were these impromptu parties going on out on the street. I wouldn't have understood that had I not made this sketch. And what it's really telling us is that they're celebrating the great city. See, because the other thing is that London has a congestion charge. It costs £12 anytime you drive your car in the city. That's $19. So traffic is cut in half, buses run on time, taxis are available everywhere, and the air is less polluted. So I'll finish up with Brother Rembrandt. Another two of his sketches. By the way, Dover Publications has a paper book with every one of Rembrandt's sketches, and they are fabulous. Here are two of women reading. And I just want to come back to the notion that sketching is a way to capture a moment, to make a record, to have something that you'll always remember. And it's not necessarily to make a beautiful picture. Notice how clumsy the hands are. Right? He was just trying to get it down quickly. So probably before the person moved.
Against the shoulders.
Well, thank you all very much.